Hello, I'm Vicky from TrainAid, and I'd like to welcome you to the Level 3 Award in Supporting Teaching and Learning in Schools. This course is designed for teaching assistants, that could be existing teaching assistants, or perhaps it's that you would like to become a teaching assistant. You're working currently with children or young people, and you're developing those skills and you want to formalize them. So, over a series of 4 lessons and 4 assignments, we will be developing those skills and thinking about the key areas of working with children and young people. So, we're going to start with lesson 1, which is communication and professional relationships with children and young people. So, we'll get started. As I've said, there'll be an assignment at the end of every lesson. So once you've worked through the lesson, you'll be obviously completing the assignment and sending that in to us for marking. If you feel like you'd like to stop the video at any point, then please do. Sometimes I will ask you to reflect or to write down some notes or something. But please just do this as you'd like to, all in one, in bits. It's completely up to you and how you'd like to work. So hopefully by the end of this lesson, you'll have learned the skills and knowledge required to effectively communicate and build relationships with children and young people in an educational setting. And you'll understand the assignment, which first one is a reflective journal, which is a nice way to start. So we'd like to focus first on childhood development, going from early childhood into young adulthood. For communication, it's really important, as I'm sure that you'll know, that we understand the stage that the child or the young person is at, so we're communicating with them in the right way, the appropriate way. Um, Perhaps a good time to pause the video now and make some notes about the main aspects you'd expect to see communication wise. What would you expect to see them doing? So, infants, toddlers, preschoolers, primary schoolers, adolescents, teenagers, and young adults. What would you expect from each stage? Note those down, and we'll come back and have a look at some of our thoughts. So, hopefully, you've got your list, and we'll have a look at some of the key aspects. You may have found more. You may have got some different things written down. That's no problem at all if you have. So you'd expect an infant to be doing these things, forming attachments, and obviously the main form of communication is to cry. Otherwise, they can't make themselves known and have their needs met. Toddlers then building up more words. And of course, this is an expected rate of development. We will come on in another session to talk about what happens when children don't develop at the expected rate. So we'll just leave that to one side at the moment. Preschoolers, more physical skills, running and jumping, more instructions to be followed as long as they're simple. And then moving into primary school, we'd expect a larger vocab, we'd expect to have some control over movements and things like that. Moving on into adolescence, concepts are more abstract and able to reflect on things that aren't necessarily about them and their peers. The feelings are complex, which is why then you get obviously more mood swings. The brain chemistry is developing at a huge rate and reforming at this point. Stronger attachments to peers, pulling away from the family main carers slightly. And then hopefully we've set them on the path to be young adults who can make good choices and have their knowledge developed enough to know where they want to be and follow their own path. So we talked about appropriate communication. So obviously you're not going to speak to a toddler the same way as you're going to speak to a teenager, or you'll be met with very short shrift by either. So how do we change our language? So with infants, we're going to obviously play little games, sing songs, and you're going to respond to every effort with a shower of praise, like, wow, you moved your head, you looked at me. It's all very exciting at that stage, and it all needs lots and lots of love and reinforcement. Then you get into that narration thing. If you've ever looked after a toddler, you'll know that you're narrating everything you're doing, they're doing, talking about really mundane things, but it's building up their vocabulary all of the time. You're doing lots of looking at books, and lots of games and songs and fun activities to keep that communication going. And then once you move into the preschool realm of role play, that can be quite exhausting for adults, particularly if you're working with these young children and maybe you've got some at home. Um, you're still talking about what they're doing. Hopefully, you're encouraging them to take turns, and you are doing all of that imaginary play where you possibly are being told what to say with some authority rather than developing your own character. So primary school and adolescence, then of course we're slightly modifying our communication. We are going to encourage them to be able to listen well, to be able to reflect on the thoughts of others. And then there may be interventions put in place for those who found that tricky, social stories, social communication groups, because it should be that communication at the expected rate of development is now quite set. Time to reflect again. And this is the beginning of your assignment, really, because you've got a reflective journal where you're going to think about your interactions with a child or a young person. So think about something recently. It could be at home, it could be at work. What happened? How did it make you feel? How did they feel? What would you do differently next time? So pause the video, have a think, maybe make some notes. This could be your first entry in your reflective journal. It doesn't have to be something huge. It could be an interaction in the corridor, but it could be something that you felt, oh, I could have handled that slightly differently. And it happens to most of us every day if we're working with children. So don't be hard on yourself about it. So pause the video, make some notes. Okay, so we're going to move on to some case studies now. So I'm going to give you some scenarios, and you're going to make a decision on what you think you would do. And we're going to move up through the age groups. So we've got two toddlers. So say we're working in a nursery at the moment. They're fighting over the last pink crayon, a classic example. Somebody starts to cry. You've got three options here. I mean, of course, there aren't only three options, but we're going with these three options. Would you distract them with something else? Would you talk to them about their bad behavior? Would you give them another pink crayon? Make your decision and think about why you would do that. Okay. So we've gone with distraction. So A, like it says there, there's no perfect way. Um, at this age, we're talking, two or three, they are not going to be able to rationalize and have a discussion about it. Certainly not at that time when their feelings are all heightened. And giving them the extra pink crayon feels like a cop out. It feels like a tempting thing to do. And I'm sure it's something that we've all done, possibly with our own children to keep the peace. But distraction would be probably the most effective there. Okay, so they're a bit older now. They're preschool, still in nursery. Friend's got a bigger tower. She's a bit jealous, knocks it over. The other little girl starts crying. Do you take everyone's tower away? Do you talk to them about kind hands? Do you distract them both with another activity and talk about kind hands later once calm? Make your decision. Okay, so we've gone for C, and there was an important difference, wasn't there, between that toddler example and the preschool example. So our communication's changing. We're not going to have a discussion while feelings are all heightened. We're going to distract, but they are old enough to then, when they're calm later and when there's a minute, just to say, let's make sure that we're kind to our friends and maybe say sorry and all of that stuff. So it's just making sure the timing's right there. So we've moved on to year five, near the end of primary school now. Two boys have been fighting over football, they're separated, and they've come back into the classrooms. This could be an afternoon of a lot of dirty looks and whispering and things like that. So it's important to get the afternoon set up. It's for learning. We're fine. We're going to get through this. So we need really good communication here. Do you get on with the afternoon and pretend it didn't happen? Do you give them both a punishment or consequence? Do you hear both sides of the story and consider events? What would you do? Okay, so we've gone for C. So they know that this is not the appropriate behavior by 9 or 10. So they needed time to calm down. So that's happened. And then they need also to have their voices heard, what was happening. So this possibly falls to the teaching assistant quite a lot as well, because the teacher needs to get on with the afternoon. You might be called on to do a fair amount of this, and this might be something that you want to look into, called restorative justice, used in not just schools, but many different places that deal with um, poor behavior or disagreements or conflict. They will use restorative justice in workplaces. And it's literally about being heard. And as long as that child feels they've been heard, and then they have time to consider and come up with the consequence. That's the idea. What do you think should be your consequence? What should be your friend's consequence? Once they're calmed, they're not saying ridiculous things. That can be incredibly effective and very empowering. And then hopefully the hope is that they take it forward, and next time they're in a conflict, they are thinking about these sorts of things already. Doesn't always work that quickly, as we know. So important to consider how you would do it, even if there's a strong temptation to just ignore it. It's definitely not the right approach. And then we are in secondary school with a year 10 student who's applying makeup in her lesson. Teacher says, please stop. She continues. Do you shout at her to stop immediately, use the next action on the behaviour policy, or take the makeup away? What would you do in that circumstance? Okay, B. Shouting is going to escalate, definitely. Be calm, be consistent, apply the behaviour policy. In any school at any age or any educational setting, there'll be a behaviour policy, not just in a secondary school or a college. It's really important at this age, though, that it's adhered to very, very consistently. So there's no confrontation. It's just move on to the next point. This will happen. Move on to the next point. That will happen. Very calm. Follow it through. Okay, so well done. How do you speak to the young people that you work with? How do you communicate? So this is another chance to stop the video and reflect, make some notes on these things. Okay, so what tone of voice do you use and how do they react to it? Um, I remember being told in teacher training, for example, that I was sometimes too loud, and that's why my class were too loud. And it seems really obvious when you think about it, but I'm really glad that they told me that. Do you need to change your tone of voice, do you think? Is the volume okay? Are you polite and respectful? Do you model good behavior? Do you comment on what they're doing in a positive way? Do you ask them questions? So if they're younger, if you work with teenagers, you don't need to worry about this one. Do you play with them, get down on their level? Do you introduce new and age appropriate vocabulary to them? Again, that's probably for the younger learners and possibly learners with special educational needs. So have a think about each of these, make some notes, and what would be a good idea for you in general and for your reflective journal assignment? Give yourself maybe a strength and an area for development from that list as well. Okay, so we're not always just working with children and young people. As a teaching assistant, of course, you will be working very closely with all sorts of adults, and you will change your communication appropriately. So just a little tick list here when working with adults. So have a read through that. I would say that the one about being professional, you never know who is in the staff room, is a really important lesson to learn quite early on, because you never know if it's somebody's parent or carer, it's a visitor, they've got certain knowledge of people in the school. So you just keep it professional and keep it positive at all times. And the same applies to working with children and young people, doesn't it? We are positive, we've got empathy, sense of humour is so important, as I'm sure you'll know. Lots of praise and listening to them. Can you think of any barriers to communication with adults or children and young people? And have you been in situations that made communication difficult? And again, you may want to pause the video here and make some notes. These may be things that happened recently or a while ago. So just some ideas, and you'll have more, I'm sure. There could be that you're working with learners that have come with very little English, for example, and there is literally a barrier in their communication, and you will need to facilitate around that and draw help from people who are experts there. There could be cultural barriers, so perhaps you've said something and actually you didn't intend offence and it's been taken. Um, there could be mental health that you weren't aware of, or you realize that that young person is anxious and you need to tread carefully. And sometimes it's just a lack of understanding that can be nobody's fault as well. But the important thing is to use your empathy and really get to know that young person and understand the way that they would like to be treated and the way that makes them tick. We must always ensure that we find a solution, and there is always a solution. It's not always quick, it's not always overnight, but this is something that you can talk about in your assignment. Some of the key legislation around communication that you need to be aware of, check that you've read the communication policy. In another lesson, you will be talking about more policies and actually looking at that for your assignment as well. So you don't need to worry too much. Just make sure that you are aware of the communication policy and the Data Protection Act. The Children Act and the Human Rights Act, very important to become familiar with those also. And we come to your assignment. So you've got through the first lesson. Well done. Hopefully you've got some useful notes for this already. So there'll be a template that you've been sent along with all your other resources for assignment one, on which you will keep your reflections of your encounters with children and young people. Please keep it to a mixture of positive and negative. So positive's great, that's fantastic. And I'm sure you have loads of them. But where we obviously do our main learning is when things don't go quite to plan. And you think, wow, that young person was quite almost offended or they were quite angry. I wonder why that is. I'm going to unpick it. I'm going to come back to it and we're going to find that solution. How have you changed the outcome? And this will be a really challenging assignment to do, a really interesting one because it's about the real children and young people that you work with and how you can improve the communication. So, good luck with that. Look forward to seeing them. And thank you so much for listening to lesson one. See you then for lesson two.